No, thank you, Chair. The remaining members of the board cannot obviously sit as a board that can take permissible decisions legally because they do not constitute a quorum, which is required by the Broadcasting Act to be 9. And to suspend them or remove them individually, we need an inquiry process, which might take long. And to dissolve them, we need an inquiry process. But the duration of that inquiry process for the dissolution purposes will be determined by what areas do we want to focus on as a committee. And then we ultimately then recommend to the National Assembly plenary to dissolve the board. I think that let's agree in principle that if for us to put an interim board in place, we need a dissolved board, and that must be dissolved through an inquiry. Let us inquire them. Then let us go back to that. If that is what it's required as per his legal advice. If the legal advice is giving is that we necessarily have to put an inquiry, let us put an inquiry, and we'll determine the length of that inquiry, and then we will then report to the National Assembly, and then we'll then take the process of the interim board. But I don't think that we must rule out, Chair, the request that we can make to the board members who are remaining. We can say as the committee that in terms of the act that has established you cannot sit as the remaining members. We advise as a committee that you should I don't think we must rule out. It's a political process. You must remember that we are not lawyers here. We are politicians. We must take a political decision collectively to say we're going to advise the remaining members of the board to step aside. If they don't, then we'll continue the process of inquiry. If they do, it makes our work easier of putting an interim board in place and then advertising for the permanent board that must be put in place to run the SABC. I think that the sentiment has been expressed to them, all of them, when we engaged earlier, that we are not pleased with the progress that they've made thus far. This neglect of fiduciary obligations, this neglect of the board charter, of basic management and board principles that they had to adhere to, and all those things there. I think they've understood that. So let us write to them. If they don't, we'll then take an inquiry, and then we'll recommend to the National Assembly that this is what should happen. And it's not prejudicial, because it might possibly reach a conclusion that maybe with new information that they give us, we might take a posture that says that we're going to appoint the remaining members of the board, not the entire 12 that is required by the Act, so that they do not take us to court that in any way wanted to remove them from the beginning. We can have an inquiry that is open-ended, and then if they justify themselves successfully, then we can then appoint the remainder of the board members and recommend a term to them in terms of what is required by the law. Then we'll take it from there. Thanks, Chair. You know, the grounds for removal of a board, of dissolution of a board, is failure to discharge fiduciary obligations. It's failure to comply with the board charter. That is not a disciplinary hearing. So the legal advice cannot be correct to say that they must come with legal representatives and all those things there. It's a governance issue that we can deal with, that you have not complied with your fiduciary duties, and that is our decision in terms of if they want to review, like all decisions of Parliament, they can review it outside this process. So an inquiry can be far much shorter than a disciplinary process. I think that the inquiry route will be able to help us in terms of but the issue that we will have to possibly deal with in the inquiry, Chair, is that it's possible that the acting COO, the one who has been appointed now, could have been illegally appointed by a non-corrading board. So there might be actually a lot of rearrangements, including executive of current affairs, Hlaudi, could have been appointed through a non-corrading board, which necessarily requires nine members of the board. And the two who came here, they say that they are shocked that there's a new COO in SABC who was executive head corporate affairs before. That is what the board members Mavuso and I do said, that they are hearing for the first time, meaning that there was no 9 members of the board when that decision was taken. So we're dealing with a situation where you have got COO Tugwane and executive Hlaudi who are illegally appointed by a board and recommended to a minister for, I don't know where she gets the instruction or the mandate to sign such an illegal decision. So we're dealing with those issues. Let's have an inquiry. I don't think it will take us a very long time. We can set one day aside. We can agree that there's going to be an inquiry of the board maybe next week, Tuesday or Wednesday, and then you'll interact with the speaker and then the chief whips in terms of a possibility of tabling an urgent report to the National Assembly, because there's a vacuum that has been created and a crisis that has been created in the SABC now. We can then agree whether we stick to the current parliamentary program, which says that the National Assembly will sit on the 25th of October, or there must be a special sitting that must be convened in terms of the rules of the National Assembly that permits for that to happen.